Now today we'll be replacing a front wheel bearing from a 2010 Subaru Impreza. The original one lasted for 135,000 miles, so that's pretty darn good. That being said, let's go ahead and tackle the job. Now a very good spot to jack up the vehicle from is right behind the oil drain pan. You have the front cross member. Really strong point to jack up the vehicle from, and we'll place it on a jack stand. So now we need to remove the axle nut from the axle. Two ways you could do this. Number one is have someone press on the brake pedal. As they're holding the brakes, grab yourself a breaker bar. This is the same tool I used to remove the lug nuts. It's 18 inches in length. Gives you a lot of leverage. You can put your body weight on it. 32mm socket. And as they're holding the brakes, again, just press down and loosen off the axle nut. Option two is if you're doing this on your own, such as I am going to use a cordless impact gun. Either way perfectly works. Now the axle nut is crimped in, as you can see, so I just need to back it off a little bit to make it completely round, and then we could turn off the axle nut. Now I recommend replacing these. Some guys reuse them, it's completely up to you, but always a good idea just to grab another brand new axle nut. They typically run for around $6 on Amazon. Now we're going to remove the caliper. As you can see, there's a top bolt. That one you can leave. You have a bottom, which is a 14mm, and I'll just tap it with a hammer and we'll back this off. Now the top pin just slides right out, and this will suspend from the strut in a moment. And as you can see, this really does need some brake pads for sure. I'll have to replace those. And just to be a little safe, I'll use a second bungee. You never know. These things are really strong, but nonetheless, doesn't hurt. It certainly beats this thing falling and having a chance of ripping the rubber brake hose. Okay, now we're going to remove the caliper bracket that's held on by two, one on top and one right here, two 17mm bolts. Now these could be rather tight, so I like to use a 3-pound hammer. Okay, one on the bottom. Make sure you guys can see that. Okay. Now what I'm doing now is just spraying some PB Blaster into these holes. Now in this case the rotor is really solidified on here, 9 years old, 135,000 miles, so it's not coming off very easily. But drilled into the rotor are two 8mm ends. Now they accept 8mm machined fasteners. In other words, don't get threaded ends, you want 8mm machined. You can typically find these at Lowe's, Home Depot. And all that you do is you turn these fasteners clockwise, and as you turn them clockwise, it's going to strike the hub and push off the rotor. Now it's striking the hub behind it. We'll do the other one. There we go. Now there are 4 bolts holding on the front hub assembly to the spindle. You have 2 up here, one on the right bottom and one on the left bottom. These are 14mm right there. But before we remove them, I'm just going to spray PB Blaster on both ends, the front and the rear here. let it soak for a moment, and then we'll give it a shot. Now for these bottom ones, I'm going to use a box end wrench. I like to loosen these up before I switch over to a ratchet. So again, I have my wrench here and just tap it with the hammer. And then once you have everything loosened up enough, I have a 14mm socket going to a 1/2 inch ratchet. And just back off the bolts here. Now just be careful of the axle boot. You don't want to rip it, but just take your time with it. Definitely use PB Blaster, big help. Now the best way to get these off, really, you have two options. Option one is using a puller and just pulling the hub off of the vehicle. Option two is a heavy hammer, which is what I did. After 5 minutes of just hitting it all around, eventually it does get loose, and then you just push the axle back here. And there you go. It does take quite an effort if you do use the hammer approach. Again, it took me a good 5 minutes. Look how beat up it is. But these things can really solidify onto the spindle here. Now these dust shields can really solidify, so I just step on it and just rotate this, and there you go. And before I install the new wheel bearing, I'm just going to clean out the knuckle here, and we'll wrap this up. Okay, so we'll start by putting on the dust shield here. And I'll just put these 2 bolts on top just to hold it in place. Okay, grab the new wheel bearing. Like this. Line everything up. Okay, grab your socket and ratchet. And then we'll torque these down to 50 foot-pounds. If you don't have a torque wrench, just make them nice and snug. Now again, on the left-hand side, the torque wrench is so long it's hitting the wheel well, so I'm just going to make these nice and tight. And if you want to torque this, it's 165 foot-pounds. And then to wrap it up, take it for a quick test drive. Make sure you don't hear any odd noises, nothing is loose, things like that. And if everything's in good shape, you're all done. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.